welcome back. It's the best day of the week. I'm with Tony Beall.
Hello
How are
there.
you?
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Fundraisers Friday, the best day of all, because it's like Friday, but it's about fundraisers and fundraising. Gotta love it, my friend, right?
Yeah, good stuff. Just giving folks some good things to think about in over the weekend, right? As they lean into some of this professional development opportunities. So
Yeah, I love it. Well, today we're going to talk about something that's, I think, confounding for some people, Tony, because we talk about it, but then we don't really know how to do it. And that's about donor retention and why it matters and how we can navigate this. And so I can't imagine a better person to have on the team to talk about this. It's just such a critical thing. You know, another critical part of our team are our presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, of course, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, joined today by Mr. Nonprofit Consultancy himself, Tony Beall, who's my sidekick on Fridays.
uh-huh.
Um, I think he's my guru too, personally. But anyway, super fun to have him on our co-host panel. And just a joy to be learning from him, as I do every time I'm with him.
Thanks.
Okay, let's start off with the big question. And why are we even having this discussion? Why does this even matter?
Yeah, donor retention, who cares?
End of
Right.
show.
Right. It's just so much easier to just keep getting new donors. So why even worry about retention of current donors, right? But
Right.
it does matter. And donor retention, we often also refer to this as stewardship, right? Because the way in which you steward a donor or investor once they've offered a gift to the organization is really important. And that stewardship, of course, leads to retention and all of the things, for our viewers, all of the things that you're seeing on the screen, uh, certainly support why it matters. For folks listening, I mean, the cost efficiency, when you think about, running a business and the cost involved in, having to hire a new employee, it's very similar in that it can, cost 5 to 10 times more to hire a new employee or to find a new donor than it costs to retain that employee or that donor. Uh, so retention matters, right? Sustainability, consistency, higher lifetime value, like it says, and advocacy and community support. I mean, nothing speaks louder to the um, the value of the work that you're doing than having someone say, I've been a financial contributor to this organization for years.
Right. Right.
So that really lends to the credibility of the organization as well when you're retaining donors and they can share that kind of story.
You know, I've never thought about the issue that you brought up and that link it to like having an employee. We all know whether we own our own businesses or not. We go to our favorite restaurant and then everybody's different, or we go to our favorite store and everybody's different. Um, that's a really interesting thing to think about our donors and how it upends the apple cart when there's all these changes in any direction. If we're always turning over our staff, if our donors are always turning over, it's just not really a healthy environment, and we have to keep starting back at square one and can't
Mhm.
really move forward. So I love that you kind of drew that arc for us, because it's a great way to think about this. It really is. And donor retention matters at the end of the day. You might not be able to see it while you're going through it, but when you can step back with maybe some more data and look at it, it's pretty
And
profound.
keeping with that arc, Julia, when you think about employee retention uh, and the similarity to donor retention, folks all want the same thing.
Yeah.
They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to feel like their contributions are meaningful. Uh, they just want to have that connectivity and all of those feels around the work that they're doing or the investments that they're making.
I love that you framed it up that way. Well, let's dig in a little bit about retention strategies. And this might seem like a heavy lift, but when I think about this, and I'm really interested to hear from you on this, it seems like we should be doing this no matter what, that this is just a good practice in orchestrating, leading, and being successful with your nonprofit mission.
Yeah, totally. I mean, these retention and stewardship strategies should be part of standard practices within the organization. And some of the things highlighted here, quick and consistent communication, timeliness is really important. When particularly, when you are following up on a gift that's been made to the organization, that's probably your very first stewardship opportunity and retention opportunity, is that thank you and recognition immediately following, the gift, not 3 or 4 months afterwards, or worst case scenario, you're not acknowledging it until you're sending the end of year tax letter, right? So quick and, and consistent communication, especially right after the gift, is really important. Again, ties in with the gratitude. And impact stories. We were just recently talking of, case studies and how those can play a role in donor retention and stewardship, and the impact stories that need to be a part of those, so that folks can visualize the work that you're doing through those stories and see the true outcome of the work and the contributions that they're making.
Well, I think it's, I've told you this story before, and I've told the story on air. My very first donation that I made with my own money, babysitting money, I made 35 cents an hour, okay, back in the day. And that was like a pretty sexy rate because all my other girlfriends were getting 30 cents an hour, but I was like getting 35. My very first philanthropic action was I bought a box of nails through a mail campaign that came to the house for Habitat for Humanity. Wow. And it was signed by, did electronically, those machines that they had that signed by Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. And they explained, what Habitat for Humanity was and all that. And I never thought of, and since I've never thought of a box of nails, which, by the way, have not changed. I mean, those boxes kind of look the same still, 50 years later. And it put into context in my mind why I was doing something and how I was impacting the organization. And then how the organization was using that box of nails, so to speak. And that is just one of those things. I think we can say, we need $100, $100,000, whatever it is. But if you can't understand what your impact is going to be, it's not a very fulfilling relationship. And I don't feel like it can grow. I don't know what you think about that. But.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And when we talk about kind of the donor cycle, and we often talk about the cause selling cycle that's available through the Fundraising Academy at National University, through those conversations, of course, as we're moving a potential donor or investor kind of through that cycle, we're constantly sharing with them not only how we do the work and why we do the work, but what the outcomes are of the work in order for them to feel good about making the donation or the investment. So, we've spoken to them a little bit about outcomes prior to the gift, but then it's even more important once they have made a gift or investment to make sure it's truly understood the impact of that and who's being served and what that looks like.
Okay, now I'm going to bring in that point of the conversation. What if you don't have good news? What do you think about that? Like, if you could, let's say you work in human services and you're dealing with homelessness prevention.
Sure.
And you see these numbers skyrocketing. How do you navigate this to your donors and your community when maybe you feel like you're not being successful? I mean, because that's part of a communications, and that's got to be part of retention strategy. Like, how do we identify that there's still work to be done?
Well, I think that authenticity and transparency build trust. And
Okay.
donors stay with organizations because they trust you.
Okay.
So if you are in that scenario, and it does happen, of course,
Yeah.
where your goal was, or you've communicated that you're going to have a certain outcome, and for whatever reason that just doesn't happen. So I think the honesty in that communication around why it didn't happen, the learning around that, it didn't happen, and this is what we learned as a result. And maybe what we learned was that we tried to do this, on beer bottle budget when it should have been a champagne budget,
Right.
and so that may be the learning. But being very transparent and authentic in that communication, again, is what builds trust and what's
Mhm.
going to keep the donor or investor with you along the journey.
Mhm. I think that's incredibly wise. And I love that you kind of gave us permission to be more vulnerable. And, maybe somebody else out there has even a greater desire to help move the concept further down the field. Or even, as we know, people love to finish capital campaigns.
Oh, exactly. Right. Folks love to be the ones that just write the last check
Mhm.
to top off the
Right.
campaign.
It's a very interesting psychological phenomena in fundraising. In fact, we have Stephen Shattuck on talking about that with Capital Campaign Pro. Really interesting. So, okay, let's talk about relationship factors, because so much of this, what you guide us through this approach to really retaining our donors, is understanding the relationship. And when I think of this, I always think of you. I hear you saying, move away from the transactional nature, just getting the check,
Mhm.
to the relationship nature. Talk to
Mhm.
us about this, Tony.
Yeah, well, sure. Again, as we kind of think about the cycle of retaining a donor or getting a gift from a donor, throughout that cycle, we truly are building a relationship, building trust,
Yeah.
again through transparency and authenticity. So your personalized communication, or any interaction with your donor or investor, just the personalization is really important, and taking the time again to make sure that their name is spelled correctly on a card or a letter that's being sent, is really important. Having that conversation with them prior to the gift, as you're building your relationship with them, to get an understanding of the ways in which they like to be communicated with.
Right.
We recently, our recent AFP chapter just had a workshop, and we talked about Gen X and Gen Z and millennials, and the different ways in which those groups like or do not like communication. So understanding that about your donor up front helps you when you think about your stewardship plan after you've received the gift or investment. Do they like a text? Do they like getting a monthly newsletter? Do they prefer emails? Do they want a phone call? Just
Yeah.
really understanding those things deepens
Mhm.
the personalization of the way in which that you're stewarding them. Uh, and I think what's shared here on the screen, two-way engagement, is really important as well. And just making sure that donors know that they can always reach out to you if they see something that they have a question about, or just whatever that might be, that you're always there for them to have that conversation. And again, it's not always asking for money. That's what stewardship is about. It's about
Right.
keeping folks informed about what's going on with the organization and how their contributions have made an impact, so that when the time is right, whether that be quarterly, annually, you're launching a new program, whatever it is, so that when the time is right to offer a new investment opportunity to the donor, or to ask them, to have a recurring gift, it's a lot easier to do that.
One of my favorite things in board service has always been the thankathons. And that is when a board would meet somewhere, pardon me, at an office that had a lot of phones or phone bank, And we would do this in person because of the energy and everything. And then we would be given a list, and it would be like an hour, 2 hours, and we just hammer out that list, and we'd call people and say, we're just calling to say thanks. We're on the board and we're not asking for money, and just thank you. And it was so much fun because, first of all, it took the pressure off. We weren't asking for money. And it was shocking at how shocked our donors were,
Mm-hmm.
because they were like, "What? You're not asking for money?" And I can remember over the years doing this for many different organizations. They'd be like, "Oh, well, but I want to give you money." And I would be like, "I don't have the capacity to do this. I mean, I'll have someone call you on Monday, or, I mean, it was always, I felt, Tony, it invigorated the board members who participated. It just was such a healthy thing,
Mm-hmm.
such a healthy thing. And I feel like we have gotten way beyond that for many reasons, but we don't do that. And it's too
Yeah,
bad.
you brought up two really interesting points there. And one is to remind folks that that's a really good example, Julia. If you are calling and, to thank a donor for a gift, or calling them, to update them on a program or update them on science that's taking place,
Yeah.
again, depending on your mission, be prepared for them to say thank you. And by the way, since we're on the phone, I'd like to make another contribution. Like, be prepared to receive that gift when you call them with a gratitude message. The other thing that you said that was really important is because we try to be mindful of the different sizes of organizations that lean into the show and the podcast. For those, shops that don't have a lot of resources, utilizing board members, utilizing volunteers, whether it's phone banking, which is a lot of fun, like you said,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
or writing thank you cards, whatever it may be. Think about utilizing your board of directors and volunteers. And in some cases, folks that benefit from your services are also great resources to help kind of share impact stories and write letters or whatever that may be. So I'm glad that you brought up, those two things. One, always be prepared to receive the gift.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I can tell you, oh my gosh, just probably 30 years ago, I was maybe even longer, 35, if I'm honest. I was part of a thankathon with our local ballet community. And we did it on a Saturday morning, brought in donuts and coffee and everything. And we had several dancers. And so the dancers were part of those calls. And I'm so-and-so, I dance with Ballet Arizona. I just want you to know. And thank you. And one of the things that they did was they knew in their heads how much for the girls, how much their point shoes cost. And how long their point shoes lasted, which most people don't realize, but they only last a performance, right? And they're crazy expensive. And so that was one of the things that was like, thanks to your donation, we were able to get, so many point shoes. By the way, I need X number of point shoes just for this season or whatever. And it really made it real, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it brought it back, and it was riveting. And I know that it changed the way we did our thankathons. We always tried to include, somebody from the cast, and we would be very honest with them and say, you need to be comfortable with this. And then we offered them a financial gift for coming in and doing it.
Nice.
Because they were employees of the company, right?
Sure.
It wasn't a lot, but I mean, it was something, and it was magical. But again, Tony, it was really magical for the board members, right? It was almost like I don't know, it was like the great Terry Axelrod, a feel good moment, she would say, from Benavon. It just got everybody engaged in something positive. A free feel good, I think, is what she would call it. There was no transaction other than the transaction of gratitude.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah, really, really fascinating.
Good
Let's
example.
move on to the next topic, and and we've got a lot of things about engagement, and we've talked about them. I'm sure you've seen a wide variety of engagement, but a lot of times we say, okay, you got to engage the donor, but what does that really mean, and what does that look like?
I mean, what an array of opportunity when we talk about the types of engagement that can take place, and again, understanding your donor also helps in kind of, again, understanding which of these is going to be the most meaningful, because we do not want to take a one size fits all approach when it comes to stewardship and engagement of our donors. A good friend of mine, for example, has an engagement opportunity with an organization that they support financially, and they're going to Guatemala for 3 days to have kind of one of those mission impact, experiences. So it can be, it can be something as big as that, depending on your mission, or it could be something as simple as taking your cell phone and doing a quick little video while you're on site somewhere. Look at what we're doing today. We're building this home today, and just doing a quick little, video and sending that off to a donor via text or email. Especially in today's environment, you don't need a lot to have meaningful impact, and the videos on your phone certainly do that. So again, it's all these different ways. It's events, it's tours. Like I said, the Guatemala, that's a mission in action, opportunity. Volunteer experiences, organizations that are food banks have tons of great volunteer, opportunities and experiences. Connections to leadership. There are organizations that have, a monthly or quarterly lunch with the executive director, and they'll invite maybe 5 or 6 donors to lunch with the executive director. And then lectures, and especially if you're a health-related organization, bringing in a doctor or a scientist, or I've often seen, pharmaceuticals will sponsor these to come in and learn about treatment opportunities or what's in the pipeline. I mean, this is stuff that is really important to donors, because a lot of times, especially when we're talking in health-related nonprofits, that's a real gift of passion. It's because they themselves or someone that they care deeply about has been impacted, by that health related issue. So again, it's a wide variety. You could be super creative, but the important thing is to do something, right? And to create, some type of system to where you are continuously stewarding your donors and investors, and having these meaningful kind of impactful touch points with them. Again, however that looks for that individual, and however that looks for your organization and the resources that you have.
Well, and I think you have to realize that by doing these things, there's value for future communications, for internal attitudes and employee retention, and sometimes you need a passion retread or reigniting that passion, getting people together to see how they are making a difference. And I also think, Tony, and I'd love to get, as we wrap up, your feelings on this. I think a lot of times we have preconceived notions about why a certain mission is important. I think it's very easy to become a philanthropic snob and to say, well, that's meaningless work, or this is more important, or, in social services, these people just need to get a job, right? I mean, to go in deeper and say, well, these people don't just need to get a job because they're suffering from this, and that, and we help with this training or, interventions, medical, psychological, spiritual, whatever. And I'd love to get kind of your feedback on that, is how we talk about our clients, how we talk about our work, and what the concept is behind the root of some of these things. Like, why is it important to have libraries? What goes on when somebody reads a book, or, I don't know, but it seems to me that we've gotten away from that. Do you see that?
I don't know that I see that we've gotten away from it. Your comment, though, the first thing that I thought about again is kind of the cycle of donor stewardship and realizing the limited bandwidth of our fundraising
Yes.
professionals. And so, when you're prospecting and then doing your pre-approach, you're going through kind of you're looking at your potential donors and you're saying, okay, this is kind of like my A group and this is my B group. And now that B group are less meaningful than A, we're just putting them in these categories because we have limited bandwidth and we need to figure out what is the most meaningful way to allocate our resources. So for those folks that would say they just need to go get a job, you're probably going to put them on your C or D list because the amount of time it's going to take
Gotcha.
to
Okay.
turn around that thinking
Okay.
may not result in the outcome that you're looking for. When you could, let's exhaust your A and B. Let's exhaust those opportunities with folks that get it immediately, right?
Okay. I love that you said that because you gave us permission to, I don't want to say walk, but you gave us permission to figure out who we need to really steward and who
Yeah.
we need to invest in. Thank you. Thank you for that. Brilliant. As we wind up today, I want to put this into a more realistic data focus point. And there is a way to calculate this. Calculating your donor retention rate. I mean, when you talk about CEO dashboards or any C-suite dashboards, information that's going across your organization to your board, I think this is like one of those KPIs. You need to have this indicator so that you can understand where you're going. How often are you seeing nonprofits using this metric?
I think once nonprofits understand how simple this metric is, they use it all the time.
Yeah.
Because it really is a simple metric, and any development officer should be able to share with you. If you were to ask them, what is your donor retention, they should be able to share that number.
Yeah, they should know it off the top of your head.
Yeah. It's a really important data point.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think that's really important, and I think because it's an indication of where you're going, right? It's not just like, oh my God, how much money do we have in the bank? It's really future thinking, right?
It really is.
And I think it's a super important. So we have this, expressed verbally total number of donors last year and this year divided by the number of donors who gave last year. So if you had 300 donors that last year and this year, and then you divide it by 500 donors, you can see, and multiply it by 100, you can see you got 60%. And I'm wondering, before we let you go, where is a sweet spot? Where should we be looking? Because some organizations are going to be horrified by the number that they have if they're not doing this. And other organizations are going to be like, wow, I don't need to work that hard because look at this high number. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, where should we level set? Where should we level set?
Yeah. So I'm going to, again, be totally honest and transparent. I don't know. I know there's data that specifically supports a healthy retention number. I don't know what that number is. I would shoot for 75-80% retention at a minimum. I'm just an 80% ideally. For me and my experiences. Again, I know that there's a number out there based on real data around, what is kind of that sweet spot that you're talking about. So, and some leaders would say anything less than 100 is unacceptable. So, so again, organizational culture and everything kind of plays into this conversation around what number would leadership find acceptable.
Right. Well, you are always acceptable on the nonprofit show. I'll just wrap it up that way. Thank you so much for really spending time with us. We every once a month or so, we do an episode just dedicated to answering your questions. So if you have something that you want us to chat about, go ahead and pop us an email, info@americannonprofitacademy.com. We're both very active on LinkedIn. You can reach out to us that way, and also the nonprofitshow.com. We want to hear what your questions or pain points are, so we can help guide or at least bring that into the discussion. Tony Beall, you're an absolute treasure. I get to say this every Friday. Thank you so much for being
You're a
here.
treasure as well. Thank you so much. And again, just so grateful to have this opportunity to have these conversations with you weekly, and so proud of you and your team and the nonprofit show for bringing just incredible subjects and themes and great professional development opportunities to the sector. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun. It really is. We have amazing sponsors that allow us to do this. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out, and they are just a marvel to have alongside. I know every day that when I come into my studio and I fire up the equipment and get everything ready, Kevin Pace, our executive producer, and his team doing the same thing, we have amazing support, and it makes all the difference in the world. Hey, Tony, as we end this amazing Fundraisers Friday, I end with this message, and it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, everyone.